subscribe my channel to watch more videos and hit the bell icon. The haunting flight. It was supposed to be an ordinary red-eye flight 291 bound for New York. The passengers settled into their seats as the cabin crew made their final safety checks. A slight turbulence rocked the plane during takeoff, but nothing unusual for a transatlantic flight. As they leveled out, the dim cabin lights created an almost peaceful atmosphere. Or so it seemed. 30 minutes into the flight, a sudden cold swept through the cabin. Flight attendant Sarah felt it first, the frigid air prickling her skin despite the heater running. She looked around but didn't see anything wrong. Then came a flicker. The cabin lights blinked once, twice, and for a split second, everything plunged into total darkness. When the lights came back on, Sarah saw something horrifying. At the back of the plane, in the shadows near the restrooms, a figure stood. He was pale, gaunt, and barely visible. Dressed in an outdated flight uniform, his face was expressionless, almost like a mannequin. He was there one moment and gone the next. Sarah rubbed her eyes, thinking it must have been her imagination. But moments later, passengers began to stir, whispering nervously. One of them, an older woman, frantically pressed her call button. Sarah hurried over, only to find the woman trembling, staring at the empty aisle. He was right there, the woman muttered. A man. He walked past, but his feet didn't touch the floor. When the lights came back on, Sarah saw something horrifying. At the back of the plane, in the shadows near the restrooms, a figure stood. He was pale, gaunt, and barely visible. Dressed in an outdated flight uniform, his face was expressionless, almost like a mannequin. He was there one moment and gone the next. Sarah rubbed her eyes, thinking it must have been her imagination. But moments later, passengers began to stir, whispering nervously. One of them, an older woman, frantically pressed her call button. Sarah hurried over, only to find the woman trembling, staring at the empty aisle. He was right there, the woman muttered. A man. He walked past, but his feet didn't touch the floor. Sarah's blood ran cold. Trying to calm the woman, she assured her it was just fatigue, that everything was fine. But deep down, Sarah knew something was terribly wrong. As the flight continued, more strange occurrences plagued the passengers. One by one, they reported seeing the same man, sometimes standing at the emergency exit, other times sitting in empty seats, always in the periphery of their vision. The lights flickered more frequently, and an icy draft flowed through the cabin, leaving everyone shivering despite the temperature being normal. On the controls, things took a terrifying turn when the cockpit door rattled violently, as if someone or something was pounding on it from the other side. The captain and co-pilot were equally confused. They hadn't left the cockpit, and the plane was cruising smoothly, but the pounding didn't stop, growing louder and more frantic. Finally, the captain called Sarah to check, but when she opened the door, there was no one there, just the faint smell of something burnt. As Sarah walked back through the aisle, she noticed the passengers growing more restless. A woman near the front screamed, her hand pointing toward the back of the plane. The man, the ghost, was there again. This time his face was no longer expressionless. His mouth hung open in a grotesque, silent scream, and his eyes were hollow, empty voids. He reached out with long, bony fingers, as if trying to grab someone anyone. Suddenly, the plane jolted. Turbulence shook the entire cabin violently, and overhead compartments flung open. Passengers clutched their seats, screaming as the plane rocked. But this was no normal turbulence. It was as if something unseen was trying to tear the plane apart. The intercom crackled to life, but instead of the captain's voice, it was a low, chilling whisper that filled the cabin. "We never landed. We never made it," the voice rasped. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized the truth. They were flying over the site of a decades-old crash, a flight that never reached its destination. The spirits of those lost passengers were trapped in the sky, haunting anyone who flew through their cursed airspace. And now they wanted the living to join them. In a final surge of turbulence, the ghostly figure disappeared, but the passengers knew this was no ordinary flight, and they might never land.